Have you ever had to wait for love? Have you ever found yourself praying and praying that God would bring you that perfect person that you could happily spend the rest of your life with, only to find yourself wondering, why isn't God answering my prayers? Maybe even wondering, why is He letting me down? In this video, we'll explore the very first love story and discover that God has a purpose in making us wait. We'll experience the full drama of that story that often gets lost in translation. And then we'll examine what that story has to teach us about God, ourselves, and our deepest yearnings. So stay tuned, and while the intro plays, why not go ahead and click that subscribe button. Hello, I'm David Lang, and this is Bible to Life, where we bring the Bible to life so that it can better impact your life. Now, the love story between Adam and Eve begins in Genesis 2:18, when God sees that Adam has a need. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." And in our last video, which I'll link to up here and in the description box, we looked at that phrase, helper fit for, or in the King James, it's help meet, a term that became help mate, and we examined the development of that term and the Hebrew phrase that it comes from. So be sure to check that video out. Now, when we read Genesis 2:18, having read Genesis chapter 1 beforehand, we have clear expectations about what's going to happen next. God, in Genesis chapter 1, says what He's going to do, and then He does it right away, and then He declares it to be good, and so on. So we expect that to happen in Genesis 2. In fact, let's look at the pattern of creation in Genesis chapter 1. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. We see here the pattern of creation in Genesis chapter 1. First, God announces His intention to create, "Let there be light." Then it immediately happens, and there was light. Then God sees that this creature that He has created is good. And finally, God either names that creature sun, moon, stars, etc., or He blesses the creature. He tells the living beings to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So that's the pattern that we've come to expect when we come to Genesis chapter 2. And then all of a sudden, God breaks the pattern. Now, out of the ground, the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. Now, notice how the pattern gets broken in these few verses. First, God sees something that is not good. It's not good that the man should be alone. Then God announces His intention to create. "I will make him a helper fit for him." Then God brings creatures for Adam to name. And then Adam names all of the creatures. So he examines all of the animals that God brings him. And yet, at the end, no helper fit for Adam is found. And so it seems as though God is parading all of these candidates before Adam, and yet none of them works. So Adam ends up disappointed. Now, this breaking of the pattern creates drama. It creates tension because we expect God to meet the need, and He doesn't. He seems to fail. But the drama is actually amplified when we look at the original Hebrew. I want to teach you the Hebrew word la. It is a preposition that is usually translated as to or for. And in Hebrew, when you name something, you call a name to it. And so whenever you see the word to call, followed by this preposition la, the act of naming is happening. A name is being called to the recipient of that name. So let's look again at Genesis 2:20. And we'll look at the standard translation. And I've highlighted each of the words that translates the Hebrew preposition la. The man gave names to la, all livestock, and 2, la, the birds of the heavens, and 2, la, every beast of the field. But for, la, Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. The ESV here, and most other translations, most other English translations, end up translating the last of these 4 las with a different word. They use the word for instead of to. Now, the reason that they do that is because if they were to say, but to Adam there was not found a helper fit for him, that would just sound strange. That's not good English. So a translation is trying to render the idea of the verse in good English. And sometimes prepositions in different languages especially don't always match up. And so you use the preposition that makes the most sense in English. But the fact that they've done that sort of obscures the unity of this verse and the drama of this verse, because you've got the same word being used 4 times. So let's look at this verse a slightly different way. So the man thought up names for, la, all livestock, and for, la, the birds of the heavens, and for, la, every beast of the field, but for, la, Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. You see what's happening here? Adam is examining all of the animals, and he's looking at each one, and he's giving appropriate names to each one. He is trying to understand that animal's nature and give it a name that perfectly fits that animal. And then he comes to examine himself, and he looks at himself and he realizes that for him there is no suitable helper. Now, as far as we know, God has not communicated to Adam, Adam, you need a suitable helper. I'm going to create a suitable helper for you. God has announced his intention to create a suitable helper in the counsels of his own will, but he hasn't spoken that to Adam. And so this process of seeing all the animals and examining all the animals creates in Adam an awareness that he needs a suitable helper. Now imagine for a moment Adam looking at each animal that the Lord brings to him, and the Lord is bringing him male and female pairs of lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and elephants and giraffes and every other animal that God has created. Adam sees a male and a female, like, corresponding to, and yet different. And he names each of those animals. And then he looks at himself and he realizes, I don't have that. I don't have a significant other. I don't have that suitable helper, that helper fit for me. And so Adam becomes aware of his need for the first time. Although God said it's not good that Adam is alone, Adam was not lonely in the garden. He had the companionship of God. So he wasn't aware that he lacked anything until God brings him all of these candidates that are not good candidates for what he really needs. And so Adam realizes, hey, there's something missing here. I have something that I need. Now, far from failing in his first attempt to bring Adam a helper fit, God has put Adam through this period of waiting and this period of examination of all the animals in order to prepare him to receive what he now acts to create, the woman, the helper fit that Adam needs. So in Genesis 2:21 we read, So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. So God repeats the process of creating and then bringing to Adam to see what he's going to call this new creature. But this creature has been taken from his own body and is a part of him that has been removed and now is being brought back to him. And when Adam sees her, in verse 23, he bursts into poetry. Then the man said, This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. I'm actually going to give a more wooden translation of the Hebrew so that you can see what's going on here. This is the time Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, this one shall be named woman, for this one was taken out of man. I want you to see the repetition of the word this, which doesn't tend to get translated in English translations. But Hebrew poetry doesn't focus on rhyming words as much as it focuses on repetition and similar sounding poetic lines that build and develop an idea. And so Adam begins, this is the time. It's as though Adam is saying, yes, you finally got it right, God. This is what I've been looking for. This is what I'm realizing that I've been missing. And then he recognizes her similarity to him. He recognizes that she is like him by saying, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be named woman. In Hebrew, that's Isha. For this one was taken out of man. In Hebrew, the word for man is Ish. And the AH ending is simply the feminine ending. And so Ish becomes Isha. So this one will be called woman because she was taken out of man. And it's nice that in English we have a similar wordplay because the word man is inside the word woman. So Adam recognizes that this is the woman that he's been waiting for, and he immediately recognizes that she is the helper fit for him, the helper who is like him as opposed to the animals, yet unlike him. She's not another man. She's a woman. She's distinct from him. She's perfectly fitted for him to help him fulfill his purpose. All right, so what can we learn about God and ourselves and our deepest yearnings from this story of Adam and Eve? Well, the first thing that we can learn is that God knows what we need before we're even aware that we need it. And so if you feel the yearning for love and you're still waiting for it, I know it's not what you want to hear, but be patient. Wait on God. Trust him that he loves you and that he knows exactly what you need. You know, my wife and I, we were both engaged to other people before we met each other. And we came to a point where we each knew that those relationships had to end. And yet we hesitated to end those relationships because we worried that we'd never find somebody else. And indeed, we had to wait a couple of years before we met each other and were married. And so waiting on God has its costs. There's pain involved. There's discomfort. Adam became aware of his discomfort as he named all these animals and realized, I'm missing something. But that process was necessary for him to be able to recognize his need for Eve, to recognize that he needed someone who was like him and yet different from him. If it's too easy, then we tend to take things for granted. And so God sometimes makes us wait. God sometimes takes us through false starts, relationships that we have to leave behind until we find the person that God has for us that is perfectly fitted for us. So if you're waiting for love and you're wondering when God's going to come through, be reassured that he knows your need before you ever even were aware of it, and trust in him. All right, so what can we learn about marriage from the story of Adam and Eve? Well, if we look back at what Adam says when he first sees Eve, this is the time. This one is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman because this one was taken out of man. There's an emphasis on this one as opposed to all of those others who were not fitting. So Eve is this one. She's the one that's the right fit. And those others, all those animals that came before, are the wrong ones. And so Adam turns his back on those animals and turns toward Eve in terms of finding a suitable helper. Well, that speaks to the exclusivity of marriage. When we marry, we turn our backs on all those others that may have come before and all those others that we will ever meet for the rest of our life. And we turn to this one that God has given us, and we cling to that one. It says in verse 24, of Genesis chapter 2. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh. So we cling to one another. We're made for one another. And that ought to help us keep our various marital conflicts in perspective. When you don't feel like your spouse is a perfect fit, when you feel like they're the obstacle and they can't see eye to eye with you, and you're frustrated by that, step back and remember how long you had to wait for that person and how perfectly fitted to you you realized that they were. And that will help you to step back and go, you know what, I'm not going anywhere. I may have to deal with some tension right now as we try to work through whatever issue we're dealing with and as we try to see eye to eye. But I'm not going anywhere because this one is the one who's perfect for me. And where else am I going to find this but here in this relationship that I have, that I've been given by God? All right, so in this video, we have looked at the story of Adam and Eve, and we've recovered some of the drama of that story. We've seen how God made Adam wait for this suitable helper that God fully intended to provide him so that God could prepare Adam for Eve before preparing Eve for Adam. And in the same way, we've seen how in our own relationships, God uses those periods of waiting that he puts us through to prepare us for our significant other, even as he's preparing them for us. So if you're still waiting for love, be patient, trust in God, look to him. He loves you, and he's got you in his hands. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please click the subscribe button and click the little bell icon to sign up for notifications so that you'll be sure not to miss any of these videos. And in the comments, please tell me a little bit about your story of waiting. What are you going through, or what did you go through before you met your significant other? Let's encourage one another with our stories of God's faithfulness to us. Until next time, thanks. Have a great day.